go ahead and hit OpenRefine, your icon that'll open it. And it should, as you'll see in just a moment, come into, I'm moving it into my second monitor, but it should open up in your browser like this. Basically, you're going to see up top in the URL bar a series of numbers, which basically indicates that it's a program that runs in your browser, but it's not really, it's not like its own website, even though it might look like one. It's just a program that's running on your computer that operates through the browser. OpenRefine is a really great tool. I've used it a lot before. It is a good tool because it allows you to manipulate or batch edit large data sets in less time than it would take to do it by hand. Sometimes you're working with a data set and it can be thousands of rows long, and cleaning out things like commas or pipes from that can be really time consuming. And if you have a program like OpenRefine that can do it for you, why not have it do that for you? It was originally created by Google and it was called Google Refine. But in the past few years, it's become an open source project and it's changed titles to OpenRefine. So it's no longer owned by Google, but that's where it started out. Now it is free for everybody to use and it's being updated a lot. I actually had to update it just yesterday, I think. So there's always improvements being made. I wanted to take this time to walk you through OpenRefine. This isn't going to be sort of an exhaustive or totally comprehensive look at OpenRefine because honestly there are so many different functions within it. But this is really intended as a way to sort of orient you to the interface and introduce you to some of the main concepts and main functions. Someone's waiting in the lobby. Sorry. Okay, thank you. But it's really intended to be, a way for you to get oriented with the program and get you comfortable enough that you can make simple edits. And then, when you want to learn more, of course, you can always come to the data cave or email a data librarian. I think somebody in RDS can go ahead and drop the data cave email into the chat. But basically, when you need help, you'll be able to come and get help. But this is intended to be more of just an introduction. So to start off with, getting you oriented with OpenRefine, let's go ahead and let's upload the data set that I had you all download. If you don't have it downloaded yet, go to the URL. It's going to be bit.ly/open-UFOs, and I can go ahead and drop that link in the chat. And make sure that when you download it as a CSV. The reason for that is basically because we're going to have to define that when we're importing our data. So it just makes it easier if we're all using the same format. But of course, you're able to work with a variety of different data types, including URLs, Google data. You can sync it up to a document in Google Drive, sync it up to a database or a clipboard. But in this case, we are taking our data from the computer. So go ahead and hit browse. So once you have it, you can go ahead and hit next. And here it's basically going to take a little bit of time and upload your data. It might take a few minutes if you have a very large data set. This is a fairly large data set, but it's one that I made a lot smaller. This data set is basically a collection of submitted UFO sighting reports. And it's not a very clean data set, which is one reason why I wanted to use it for this workshop. There's a lot of problems with this data set that make it kind of difficult to use. And cleaning it makes it a lot easier to use. It comes from a data set that is basically a collection of UFO sightings from all across the country, but I narrowed the scope so that it only includes sightings that happened in Texas, just to make it a little bit more specific and make the data set a little bit smaller and more relevant. So let's go ahead and get you started with the basic dashboard here. This is the opening screen that you'll get once you upload your data. And it's basically a place where you can make sure that your data was uploaded correctly. If you've used a tool like Tableau, you might be familiar with a similar type of opening screen where you're able to adjust your variables and basically make sure that your data is interpreted correctly by the program. This is a very similar type of screen. And there's a few different changes that you'll want to make or things that you'll want to be aware of. The first thing is character encoding, which is down here that I highlighted in the bottom half of the screen. Right now, it's set to US ASCII, which is one type of character encoding, or basically one way that the computer will understand the text that you put into it. Not all character encoding systems are going to recognize all characters, meaning letters. It can also mean things like Unicode characters. Sometimes I'm not sure if OpenRefine has the capabilities to read emojis, but that would also be considered a character. So it's set right now to US ASCII. Go ahead and click in that little box right there and change it to UTF-8. That'll go ahead, and that's better for the program to understand our data set. This is going to vary based on the kinds of characters that you include in your data set. But for now, let's make sure to go with UTF-8. Right below that, you'll see something that says columns are separated by. In this case, we're using a CSV file, which means that, in practice, this data set, if you read it as a text file, it's not going to look like a spreadsheet. It's going to look like a lot of text, and some of that text is separated by commas. And in turn, when we tell the program that these columns are separated by commas, it will interpret that and come up with the screen that you have above. If you're using a TSV or tab separated values, you would click tabs. You can also do custom. So if you have a different kind of format and your columns are separated by, say, like a pipe, you can select that there, and basically this just tells OpenRefine how to interpret your data and how to structure your spreadsheet. So it's very important to make sure that that is selected properly. You will probably notice when it isn't, because all your text will be sort of pushed together and not really recognizable. Right below that, it's going to say trim leading and trailing white space from strings. You're going to want to make sure that this is checked for most purposes, because basically, especially when it comes to a data set like this, which is entirely user submitted, it's not cleaned by a third party. You are kind of the first person who's cleaning this data, essentially. There might be, say, like a space before, the city name Abilene, or a space afterwards, and basically that's going to make it seen as its own separate variable. So you'll have Abilene just as it is, and then you'll have space Abilene as its own record, and Abilene space as its own record. I'll talk a little bit more about how to fix that problem when you're using OpenRefine later. But for now, just make sure that that's checked. You're going to also want to make sure that this option here on the right part of the screen, parse next one lines as column headers, is checked. This basically ensures that we have column headings that are recognized. If this wasn't checked, for example, date time would be just another value, city would be just another value, instead of being recognized as a header. Okay, so the last thing that you want to do is you can give your project a name. I'm going to call this OpenRefine tutorial. You can always leave it with the same name that it comes with as a file, but I find it useful to give it its own title. You can also provide tags for it, which are used internally. I have not felt the need to do that before with my OpenRefine projects, but I imagine that might be different if you have a great quantity of OpenRefine projects that you're working on constantly. It can be helpful for that. And then we're going to go ahead and say create project. And it's going to take a little bit of time to create the project. Not too much time because this is a relatively small data set, all things considered. And here we have our data. So this is going to be your main operating screen when you're using OpenRefine. This is a screen that you're going to be seeing basically anytime that you're working with the data. And a lot of the commands that you use are going to be seen over in this little sidebar right here, where right now you'll see something that says using facets and filters. Before I get into facets and filters and clustering and all the other commands that you can use, I want to just go over the basic interface of the screen to make sure that you understand what's going on and what you're working with. The first thing that you'll notice is that there are two different kinds of what would I call them? Two different types of representations of data in OpenRefine. You have rows and then you have records. So right now rows is selected. This might be the way that you're most familiar with data, in that each independent row, 1, 2, 3, 4, etc., is its own object. It's not necessarily interconnected with another object on here. It's sort of, 1 is its own citing, 2 is its own citing, 3, etc. Alternatively, you also have something called records, which is another way of viewing your data. It's not going to look very different right now because I haven't selected any records. But records is a function that allows you to combine multiple rows and have data interacting with itself. And basically, providing a more interactive or communicative or grouped together look at your data set. I'm going to switch it back to rows for now. The second thing that you're going to see is show with 5, 10, 25, and 50. This is basically going to show you how many rows you can see at one time. I personally like to see all the rows. I would actually prefer it if you could just look at every single row all at once. That's not really possible. So I usually go to 50, but it's totally up to you as far as how many rows you want to see at one time. Up here, we can see that there are 4,050 rows, which is a lot. It's not too big that we can't work with it, but it's a good number for working with OpenRefine. So also, as you can see, all of our data imported correctly. Things look the way that they should look. Latitude and longitude look correct. Things are formatted correctly. It's not going to be like, if you've used Tableau, you'll know that Tableau needs to define each sort of variable that you have as something that's geographic or as a string, as a number, as a date. OpenRefine isn't really like that. It's more focused on, everything is sort of a string. And we have fields here called date time, but they're not interpreted differently than something like city. OpenRefine is more focused on changing the text. So let's go ahead and take a look at facets and filtering, which are going to be the first things that we talk about. As an example, let me think. Go ahead, and if you have this open, you can follow along. If you don't have it open, that's totally fine, and I'll walk you through this. But go ahead and click on where it says duration and then hours, and go ahead and click on, or hover over facet at the top, and then click text facet. when you do that, you'll see that on the left side of the screen, there is a new option that comes up. I'm going to make it a little bit bigger. So here is basically what you can do when it comes to faceting. Faceting allows you to rename or edit different variables, different values that all have similar sort of names. You'll be able to do this with a little bit more detail with clustering, but faceting allows you to make quick edits. For example, right here, we have something that says 30 minutes or 30 min, and then below it 30 minutes. What we can do here, we can click on edit over 30 min and add 30 minutes to it, apply, and it's now grouped as two different records. Or now those two variables are the same. As you can see, this data set is not very clean and would take quite a lot of work to, change all of the problems involved with the representations of time here. But we can also, to play with it a little bit more, things like 1 hour, 1 hour, 1 minute, 1 minuet. We can go ahead and see right here that right below 1 minuet, there's something 1 minute, which has 127 hits. So there's 127 rows that have 1 minute as the duration, spelled exactly that way. So what we can do here, we can click edit, 1 minute, and then change 1 minuet, although 1 minuet would probably be nice. And now we have 125 records. The next thing that there is filtering. Filtering is basically going to allow you to view all of the records that meet a certain criteria, that have a certain quality or variable to them. So for example, we could look at 1 hour by hovering over 1 hour and hitting where it says include. Now this is only going to show you all of the records that say 1 hour. You can see up here, up at the top, that there's 65 matching rows out of 4,050 total. So there's 65 rows that have 1 hour marked in them. But of course, this isn't going to be, there's not only 65 rows that took place over 1 hour, it's just the spelling of 1 hour. So as you can also see by something down here that says 1 hour plus, if we include that, 3 rows pop up, 68 matching rows. And we can also go back up and exclude records from this. So say that, we're looking at 1 hour and 1 hour plus, and we really realize that we just want to look at 1 hour plus, we can hit exclude on 1 hour by hovering over it, and that'll remove all of the excluded rows. So we can go ahead and exclude all of them. Next, I want to talk about clustering. And to talk about clustering, I want to use a different variable. I think we should use the variable city. So to get to clustering, you're going to want to click the arrow up at the top of the tab, sorry, at the top of the column, and go down to where it says edit cells. And then in that window, go down to where it says cluster and edit. And this is going to bring up a window that basically is going to give you a list of variables that are spelled almost the same, but might have been mistyped, or maybe somebody hit the wrong key, like in this case, key collision. So these are things like Cannondale and Cannondale with a comma. What we can do here is we can click merge, and then both of these values will be named Cannondale without the comma. Same here for Arvana, La Mesa. I'm actually not familiar with this area, So I can't exactly say which one is correct, but for the sake of this tutorial, let's go ahead and say that the first option is correct. And Dallas-Fort Worth, I mean, you could kind of do that either way, depending on how you're spelling it. So go ahead and click that, although I would capitalize the F in Fort Worth. And I'll do that too. So now that you have all of these selected, go ahead and go to the bottom and click Merge Selected and Recluster. So it basically, it changed all 6 of those cities that were misspelled. You can go to another method and recluster more. So the method that we just looked at was key collision, which is going to basically identify spaces where, you know, somebody hit the wrong key while they were typing. You can also go to nearest neighbor, which tends to bring up a few more. For example, we have Royce City, and Royce City is going to be Royce with an S, so you can hit merge. Harker Heights, but missing an H. San Antonio and San Antonio. San Antonio, Garwood and Harwood. I'm actually not sure. I think it's Harwood. I'm not 100% sure. Either way, you can correct that if it's correct. Hallettsville. Basically, this is a way to correct things that were just misspelled by chance. And it's a good way to basically clean up your data, because a lot of the times, you know, when you're working with a really large data set, sometimes you might just have, you know, 1 or 2 rows that are misspelled very slightly. Having those few rows can mess up your analysis. So this is basically a good way to clean up your data quickly and you know, be able to change large amounts of it. This will also vary by the kind of data set that you have. This data set, for example, you know, most of the cities are named correctly, but you might be working with a data set one day that has a lot of slightly misspelled values, and that can be helpful. So again, you can hit merge selected and recluster, and look, just from that, we changed 212 rows. You can close. Let me see what's next. You can also split cells. As an example, what you can do is for something like date posted, say that you wanted to separate this out by, you know, having 1 column for the month, 1 column for the day, and 1 column for the year. In this case, each one of those values is separated by a slash. So what you can do is you can go up to the arrow once again, click Edit Cells, and then Split Multi-Valued Cells. And here, it's going to ask us what our separator is. Our separator is basically going to be, in this case, the /, because that's what's separating all of the values. You can also, you know, when you get to be a little bit more advanced with it, you can use something called a regular expression, which if you're not familiar with regular expressions, they are basically combinations of punctuation and letters that a computer can read and basically change your data based on a pattern that you specify. But in this case, it's relatively simple in that we only need to use the /. Let's go ahead and click OK. And I think I did that incorrectly. I'm sorry. Let's hit undo, which is the good thing about OpenRefine is you can undo things. By clicking up there, I accidentally, okay, so what you're going to want to do is you're going to want to actually go to Edit Column and go to Split into Several Columns. And then there is where you're going to want to use the /. So it's a slight difference, but basically what I mistakenly did before was I turned each month, day, and year into its own row when what we wanted to do was create its own column. So this is what you do for columns. Click OK. And then right there, you're going to see 450 cells in the column were posted into several columns by separator. So here we have date posted 1, date posted 2, and date posted 3. Date posted 1 is the month, date posted 2 is the day, and date posted 3 is the year. So what we can also do here is we can rename this column by going to the arrow, hitting edit column, and then going to rename this column. So we can name this month. Or let's just say month posted. And we can rename this column and say date posted. By the way, I am doing this to fit in with the norms of this spreadsheet, but ordinarily when you're working with data, you're going to want to minimize the amount of spaces that you have and write something like date posted, just to, you know, have good sort of data hygiene and make sure that it's easy to manipulate your data if you have to. In this case, I'm going to be a little bad and put this space to keep with the conventions, and also because I know that I'm not going to be manipulating the specific data set later, but just for future reference. Column 3, year posted. So there we go. There are values all split up. Let me see what else there is that I can go over. You can do something called a transformation, which I'm not going to get too in depth on because that's a little bit more complicated. But basically what you can do is you can go to a tab, click, where is it? Okay, click edit cells, transform, or you can also click common transforms, which will give you a list of basically different types of transformations that people use commonly. You can treat leading and tailing white space, which can be good for if you're splitting up cells, because sometimes that will come with leading and trailing white space. Collapse consecutive white space. You can change things to title case, uppercase, lowercase, change it to number, date, text, change to null or an empty string. But let's also take a look at transform the actual screen. So it gives you a few different options for the kind of language that you're going to want to use for your transformation. The first option is general refine expression language, which is going to be similar actually to Excel. You can also use Python /Json and Clojure. I haven't heard of Clojure, so I can't speak to it. But basically, to make a transformation beyond the most commonly used transformations that are already available to you, you're going to write a command in here, and then OpenRefine will follow that command and transform your data. So let's not do that now, and let's click cancel. The last thing I want to go over for now is the undo and redo functions. This is a really great part of OpenRefine, in my opinion. It's one that I used just a few minutes ago. But basically, OpenRefine tracks all of your changes that you make to your data. And just by clicking over to the undo/redo window, you're able to revert your project to a previous state. Although do note that when you do this, you can't get back to what it was before. So just be sure that the changes that you're making are changes that you want to make. You know, if you go back all the way to this first step and then do something different, all of this will be lost. So just keep that in mind. But for example, you know, say I wanted to go back to before I renamed column number 3. I can do that. And I can go back to 9 from this point. But if I go back and I change something in this window, then I can't go back to 9. It's kind of a back to the future, like, don't mess with the future type thing, but it'll basically erase what you did. But I think that's a really helpful part of OpenRefine, because sometimes, as we saw earlier in the workshop, sometimes you make a mistake and sometimes you want to go back and change it. And it can be very helpful. I lied, actually. There's one more thing I want to talk about, which is export. Basically how to export your data from this. You're going to go up into the upper right-hand corner where it says export. Click on that. And it's going to give you a list of different kinds of export options. So you can export it like we imported it as a comma separated value, as a CSV file, TSV, HTML table, Excel 2007, ODF, SQL exporter, Google Sheets. There's a lot of different options. And that's where you'll head if you have any kinds of problems. Sorry, that is where you'll head when you basically are done working with your data and you want to export it and use your new data set in your project. So that I believe is it from this introduction. I can go ahead and take questions if you want. Yeah. I'll come on video too. I just realized I haven't been on video. Looks like 2 people are typing. The maximum number of rows it can handle. I'm actually not sure on that front. I'll tell you that I've worked with data sets up to 25,000 rows, and it's been fine. You might need to refresh it once in a while. I know that also one thing that you might run into when you're working with OpenRefine is that if you leave the window alone for too long and you're not interacting with it, it'll kind of freeze and you'll have to start over again. So say that you have a tab minimized and you go back to it like an hour later, and you want to make some changes. It might tell you that, it can't be done or something like that. That really just means that you need to restart it. It can't really handle being open for too long and not interacted with. But I'm not familiar with anyone who's run into problems with how many rows it can handle. The only thing I would think of would be that if you're using like a very, very large data set, like pset over 1 million, it might be slower and might cause problems. But I've worked in OpenRefine with data sets up to 25,000 and not had a problem. Yeah. Okay, so when you're cleaning up data files, cells that hold data such as NA need to be cleared. Is that done in facets and filters? I would imagine that would be done using, let's see, edit cells. And then I'm trying to figure out if that would be replace. Let's try replace. Sorry, I've done this in Tableau. Edit cells. I would imagine that you could. What you would probably want to do, I mean, you can definitely do it in Tableau. Sorry, you can definitely do it in OpenRefine. I'm trying to think specifically of it if it's a facet or a filter or something that you would do by just editing cells. but I know that it's something that you can do. It looks like you can change it to null as a transformation, which might be one option. Basically, using a transformation option to change all of those NA values or empty values to null. No problem. Anybody else have any questions? Okay, we can go ahead and conclude there. I hope you all have a good day, and make sure that if you haven't already voted and you're able to vote, that you go ahead and do that. But it's been great being here, so thank you all for your time and for being here with me.